I've often wondered what audacity truly means. Sure, we toss the word around usually when someone cuts in line or parks like a maniac, but to actually witness it in its pure, jaw-dropping, unfiltered glory? That's rare. A privilege, maybe. Or a curse. Depends how close you are when it happens. For me, that moment came courtesy of Brenda Periwinkle, the self-anointed queen of the prestigious Pines Homeowners Association. And trust me, she redefined the word audacity in ways I'll never forget. Even now, I chuckle and shake my head thinking about it. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from, because the tale of how Brenda tried to extend her HOA tyranny beyond her jurisdiction, only to be handcuffed by my son, is one for the books. It all started with a dream. A modest, innocent dream. To own a home where the color of my mailbox wasn't subject to public tribunal and the height of my grass didn't trigger threats of exile. After 5 long years under Brenda's rule in prestigious Pines, a name soaked in irony, I was finally escaping. Brenda, or President Periwinkle, as she insisted on being called, even by folks who knew her back when she had braces and a unibrow, ruled over the neighborhood like a medieval monarch. The HOA bylaws were her scepter. The newsletter? Her royal decree. She had a nose just a touch too long, always pointed slightly downward at you, lips pursed in permanent judgment, often framed by whatever oversized designer sunglasses were trending, likely knockoffs judging by the chipping gold paint. Her chariot of choice, a pearlescent white Escalade with enough chrome to blind a pilot, prowling the cul-de-sacs like a predator sniffing out code violations. My offenses had been laughably minor: a garden gnome deemed aesthetic pollution, a basketball hoop left out 20 minutes too long, and the ultimate sin, repainting my front door a shade of blue that dared to show personality. The color palette she enforced like gospel? Beige, taupe, grayish, and if you were feeling rebellious, a slightly darker beige. The day I closed on my new house, a charming bungalow on 3 glorious regulation-free acres just 2 miles outside prestigious Pines, was one of the happiest of my life. There were oaks, a babbling brook, a breeze that didn't carry the scent of paranoia. And best of all, no Brenda. Or so I thought. The property line was clearly marked. I'd paid for a fresh survey, because, well, I'm a logistics coordinator. Precision is my profession. I didn't expect trouble, but I'm a big believer in boundaries, literal and otherwise. Little did I know that boundary was about to be tested. Moving day was smooth. Until I saw it. A flash of white. Too much chrome. Slowly creeping down the public road at the edge of my new driveway. My heart dropped. Brenda. Sunglasses on, expression flat and disapproving. She didn't stop. Not yet. She just drove past, surveying my welcome mat and slightly wild lawn like a queen spotting rebels on the frontier. 2 days later she returned. This time her Escalade rolled to a crawl opposite my driveway. The tinted window slid down. Just admiring the local color, she sneered, her voice honeyed with contempt. Quite different from prestigious Pines, isn't it? I smiled politely. That was rather the point. The window slid back up, but she lingered. Engine idling. Glaring. A slow, passive-aggressive declaration of war. That night I walked the perimeter again. Surveyor's map in hand. Snapping date-stamped photos of the boundary markers. A small voice, honed from years of managing supply chains and anticipating worst-case scenarios, told me, this was only the beginning. My son Michael called later that night. He's a sheriff's deputy. A good kid grown into a better man. He'd been thrilled about my escape from HOA hell. So how's freedom feel? He asked with a laugh. Mostly peaceful, I replied. Though Brenda's apparently having separation issues. Michael sighed. Brenda's legendary at the station. Serial complainer. Suspicious lawn ornaments, suspicious mailboxes, suspicious neighbors. She has zero authority where you are now. Zero authority. Those words should have comforted me. But as I was about to learn, Brenda Periwinkle didn't believe in boundaries, legal or otherwise. I knew what Michael said was true. Brenda Periwinkle had zero legal authority outside prestigious Pines. But Brenda operated on a different plane of logic, one where her imagined power was limitless and self-justified. The very next morning I was on my porch sipping coffee, basking in the freedom of a mailbox untouched by regulations, when I noticed something tucked under it, a brightly colored flyer. At first glance it looked like junk mail, a standard ad for a lawn care service. But hidden inside the trifold was a neatly laser-printed note, on prestigious Pines letterhead, that read, "Friendly reminder. While the aesthetic standards of prestigious Pines do not officially extend to adjacent properties, a considerate neighbor understands the importance of maintaining a visual harmony that benefits the entire wider community. Overgrown vegetation, unkempt appearances, or garish displays can negatively impact property values and the tranquil enjoyment of nearby residents." The prestigious Pines Architectural Review Committee. There was no signature, but it didn't need one. The pompous wording. The smug tone. The sheer nerve. It screamed Brenda. She had trespassed onto my property to leave this friendly threat. I calmly placed the note in a Ziploc bag. Evidence, item number 1. The game was on. Her harassment escalated quickly. Her Escalade, still blindingly chrome-laden, became a regular fixture on the county road, cruising by like a bloated mechanical shark. Sometimes she'd park just outside my property line, angling the SUV to give her a perfect view of my front yard. And sometimes she'd sit there for up to an hour, her silhouette tilting now and then as if dictating notes into some ridiculous little recorder. I began to feel like I was under surveillance because one afternoon I was planting tomatoes in my front yard. Something forbidden in prestigious Pines, of course. Vegetables were banned in favor of ornamental shrubbery. I was digging happily into the rich soil when I heard a polite cough. There she was, standing just beyond my rustic split-rail fence. One of my favorite anti-HOA statements was Brenda Periwinkle, scowl fully exposed, having opted to leave the oversized sunglasses at home for full facial intimidation. In one hand, a tiny leather-bound notepad. In the other, a gold-plated pen held like a weapon. "Disturbing the native soil composition, are we?" she asked, her voice crisp and condescending. "I'm planting tomatoes, Brenda," I replied, doing my best to keep my voice level. "Good for salads," she sniffed. "But such endeavors can attract vermin. And vermin, as you know, do not respect property lines. The residents of prestigious Pines have a right to live free from pestilence." I stood up, sweat on my brow, dirt on my gloves. "Brenda, this is my property. It's not part of prestigious Pines. What I plant, and whether or not it attracts the occasional squirrel, is, with all due respect, none of your concern." Her eyes narrowed. "Everything is everyone's concern when it impacts community standards, Mrs. Gable. Some boundaries are moral, not just geographical." I nearly laughed. Moral boundaries? From the woman who tried to fine a family because their kids' chalk drawings were too primitive to meet artistic expectations? That was the moment I doubled down. I'd already installed discrete security cameras, one watching the driveway, the other keeping an eye on the property line. Now I began documenting everything. Dates, times, every drive-by, every comment, every time she so much as looked at my house too long. Brenda didn't de-escalate. People like her can't. They feed on control, and when they lose it they push harder. That push was coming. Next, she tried to turn the neighbors against me. One morning, Jim Henderson, a kind older man who owned the farm bordering the back of my property, dropped by. He looked uncomfortable. "Morning, Eleanor," he said, twisting his feed cap. "Had a rather energetic visitor yesterday." I didn't need to ask who. "Brenda?" He nodded. "That's the one. Pulled up in a shiny SUV, said she was with the, what did she call it? The Greater Community Standards Board? Asked me if I'd noticed any unusual activity or declining upkeep from your side." I clenched my jaw. "And what did you tell her?" He chuckled. "Told her the only unusual thing I'd seen was a fancy city lady wasting good daylight bothering people who mind their own business. And that your place looks better than it has in years now that someone's actually living in it." I thanked him, touched. Brenda, however, wasn't deterred. Days later, a formal envelope arrived. This one mailed with prestigious Pines return address and letterhead. It was addressed simply to occupant. Inside, a letter listed a series of observed potential nuisances, each conveniently dated to match Brenda's surveillance visits. The offenses? Excessive grassland potentially harboring ticks, my wildflower meadow. Non-standard mailbox coloration, forest green, tasteful and none of her business. Visible storage of gardening implements during daylight hours, my wheelbarrow. Unregulated bird feeding activity likely to attract undesirable avian species, i.e. starlings and grackles. It closed with a warning. To ensure harmonious coexistence with the nearby prestigious Pines community, please remediate the above concerns. Further escalation may be necessary if voluntary compliance is not achieved. Signed in looping, imperious cursive. Brenda Periwinkle, President, Prestigious Pines HOA and concerned citizen. I photocopied it. Filed it with my growing archive of Brendabilia. Then I called Michael. She's mailing letters now, Mike. Official-looking stuff. Accusing me of harboring ticks and feeding grackles. He let out a long whistle. Wow. She's escalating. That's borderline harassment. If the letters start to include threats, or she steps on your property, call it in. Otherwise just keep documenting. It's the pattern of behavior we'll need if this goes legal. He was right. Her letters were carefully crafted to avoid crossing the legal line, full of insinuations, not accusations. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. A slow psychological campaign designed to wear me down. But Brenda had miscalculated. She thought she could push me into submission. What she didn't realize was, I don't wear down. I build cases. And I had a feeling that Brenda's boundless arrogance was about to hand me exactly what I needed. Because the next phase of her campaign? It involved trying to weaponize municipal services. And that was a mistake. It started quietly enough. One morning, a county code enforcement vehicle rolled up my driveway. A pleasant but slightly frazzled-looking young woman stepped out and introduced herself as Miss Albright. We received an anonymous complaint regarding. She consulted her clipboard, frowning, uncontained refuse and potentially hazardous vegetation. I gave her a tour. Recycling bins? Neatly stacked. Trash can? Securely lidded and barely half full, pickup was 2 days away. The so-called hazardous vegetation? My natural meadow, deliberately maintained as wildlife habitat, far from any structures and the lawns surrounding the house? Mowed. Just not to suburban putting green standards. This is 3 acres, Miss Albright, I explained. I'm not trying to win yard of the month. I'm trying to support pollinators and not waste water. It's not a fire hazard. It's an ecosystem. To her credit, she looked mildly embarrassed. Ma'am, your property looks fine to me. Honestly? More than fine. Some people just have a different idea of what constitutes a hazard. She made a few notes, thanked me politely and left. I had a very good idea who those some people were. 2 days later, another visit. This time from animal control. Another anonymous tip, this one alleging a possible feral dog colony and irresponsible pet ownership. I own exactly 1 dog. Bartholomew. An elderly, gentle golden retriever who naps more than he breathes and wouldn't roam if you bribed him. The officer, a grizzled man named Dave who looked like he'd wrestled coyotes in his spare time, took one look at Bartholomew's wagging tail and sighed. Let me guess, he said. Lady in a shiny white SUV's been calling? I nodded. Figures, he muttered. She calls about once a month. Squirrels and flower beds. Stray cats. Once about a garden gnome she thought was aggressively positioned. Never anything worth writing up. Sorry to bother you, ma'am. Brenda's tactics were evolving. She was now weaponizing taxpayer-funded services in her crusade to make my life miserable. Each visit was a waste of public time, and a paper cut to my peace of mind. I logged every one. Dates, times, names of officials, complaint numbers if I could get them. My evidence folder was thickening into a small novel. Michael, my son, wasn't thrilled. She's abusing the system, Mom, he said during one of our calls. If we could prove she's making the complaints and that they're knowingly false, that's criminal. But, anonymous, makes it tricky. Unless she slips up or we link it directly to her, it's just smoke. And smoke, unfortunately, was not yet fire. I needed something undeniable. Then it happened. On a windy Tuesday afternoon, I hired a local arborist to trim dead branches from an old oak near the front of the property. Responsible, routine work. His truck, clearly marked with company branding, was parked squarely on my driveway, nowhere near the county road. They'd even set out safety cones, though it wasn't necessary. I was inside pouring lemonade when I heard raised voices. I rushed to the window. There she was. Brenda Periwinkle, halfway out of her Escalade, which she had parked half on, half off the county road, effectively blocking a lane. She was gesturing wildly at Gus, the arborist, a large, soft-spoken man who looked like he'd rather climb a tree than deal with her. I stepped outside, forcing myself to stay calm. "Is there a problem, Brenda?" She spun toward me, red-faced and seething. "A problem? The circus is a hazard. That truck is unsightly, the equipment is disruptive, and the noise. This is destroying the tranquility of the wider community." I glanced at Gus's truck, parked neatly on my land. Then at her Escalade, blocking public access. Then back at Brenda. "Brenda," I said quietly, "the truck is on my property. Your car is blocking public access. The only eyesore I see is your SUV, illegally parked. And as for the noise? The loudest thing out here is you." Gus nodded. "Ma'am, we're just doing our job. Safely. On private land. This lady," he gestured toward me, "hired us legally. And you came screaming about permits we don't need and decibel levels we don't deserve." Brenda drew herself up to her full, if unimpressive, height. "I am a concerned citizen and president of the prestigious Pines Homeowners Association. I have a right to ensure public safety and community standards." And then she did it. She pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the sheriff," she announced, eyes wild with self-importance. "There is unauthorized commercial activity occurring, creating a nuisance and potentially damaging county property." She was actually dialing. And that was it. This wasn't a petty complaint. This was an official, false report being made in front of a witness. A working professional. On camera. On record. I took a breath, steady and sharp. "Brenda," I said, just loud enough for Gus and the camera to hear, "you do remember that my son Michael Gable is a deputy with the county sheriff's department, right?" There was a flicker. The barest twitch in her eye. But she didn't back down. "That is irrelevant," she barked. "The law applies to everyone." Then, sweet as spoiled syrup, she turned to her phone. "Yes, hello, I'd like to report a disturbance. A commercial truck is blocking the road, unpermitted activity, possible property damage." She was painting a picture of chaos, of illegality, of risk. All of it, fiction. Gus and I exchanged a look. He just shook his head, a resigned smile playing on his lips. I felt a strange calm settle over me, because at long last, Brenda Periwinkle had overplayed her hand. She thought she was summoning the cavalry to reinforce her imaginary kingdom. She had no idea she was calling my son. She had no idea she was summoning her own reckoning. The wait for the deputies felt like both an eternity and a blink. Gus, the arborist, had quietly instructed his crew to pause their work. He stood beside me near the porch, arms folded, occasionally muttering, "Some folks just got too much darn time." Brenda, meanwhile, patrolled the shoulder of the county road like a general preparing for a siege. Her Escalade was still parked illegally, half on, half off the road, and she wore a smug, expectant look as if rehearsing her victory speech. She clearly anticipated the deputies arriving to confirm her authority and shame me for daring to trim a tree on my own land. I used the time wisely. I started a video recording, discreet but clear, capturing her Escalade, her pacing, the calm, uneventful scene she was so desperate to portray as a crime scene. Then I shot a quick text to Michael. "Brenda P. is here. Just called the sheriff on me, claiming I've got illegal tree work and a blocked road. No need to step in unless it escalates. She's alleging all kinds of nonsense. Thought you should know." His reply came fast. "Unbelievable. Keep calm. Deputies will handle it. Document everything. I'm standing by." Knowing Michael was aware, and that he trusted me to stay composed, gave me a quiet edge of confidence. 15 minutes later, the first patrol car pulled up. 2 deputies stepped out, young, professional, and immediately skeptical as they surveyed the entirely unchaotic scene. Brenda lit up like a porch lantern in mosquito season. She rushed toward them, arm raised like a student desperate to answer a question. "Officers. Thank goodness you're here," she exclaimed, dripping with civic distress. "This situation has gotten completely out of control." She launched into her monologue, hands flailing in theatrical dismay as she gestured to Gus's truck, parked entirely on my driveway, the oak tree my house, as though they were criminal co-conspirators. Her accusations included unauthorized commercial activity, disregard for public safety, and potential damage to infrastructure. Conveniently, she omitted the fact that her own SUV was the only actual obstruction. The deputies listened without interrupting. One, Deputy Miller, took notes. The other, Deputy Chin, walked over to inspect Gus's truck, the cones, and the lack of any road obstruction. He then gave Brenda's Escalade a long, unimpressed glance. I stood silently, letting Brenda dig her own grave with every word. When she finally paused, red-faced and breathless, Deputy Miller turned to me. "Ma'am, are you the property owner?" "Yes, officer. Eleanor Gable." "And the tree crew is here at your request?" "They are. Trimming dead branches from that oak. All on my property." Deputy Miller nodded, then looked to Brenda. "Ma'am, you identified yourself as?" "Brenda Periwinkle," she said proudly. "President of the prestigious Pines Homeowners Association." As if that carried the weight of law. Deputy Chin chimed in, voice mild but firm. "Miss Periwinkle, your vehicle is partially blocking this county road. Could you please relocate it to the shoulder or a nearby driveway?" Brenda blinked, offended. "But I'm the complainant. I needed to be present for this investigation." "We appreciate that," Miller said calmly. "But we also need the road kept clear. You can park on the shoulder, further down, or in this driveway if the property owner permits." "I do not," I said evenly. "There's room on the shoulder just past that mailbox," I added. Brenda huffed but obeyed, stomping off to move her vehicle, grudgingly and not particularly well. Deputy Miller turned back to me. "So, Mrs. Gable, aside from Miss Periwinkle's concerns, any safety issues here? Problems with the crew?" "None. Gus and his team have been nothing but professional. The only disturbance has been her repeated interruptions." At that moment, a second vehicle pulled up, an unmarked SUV with official plates. My son Michael stepped out. In full uniform. He hadn't come lights blazing. He didn't need to. He simply walked up, cool and observant. Brenda, who had just finished parking her chariot, crookedly, turned and lit up again. Her expression morphed from flustered to delighted. "Oh, Officer Gable," she gushed, the tone suddenly syrupy. "So good to see you. Perhaps you can explain the importance of maintaining community standards to your colleagues here." She clearly thought Michael's presence was her ace in the hole. Michael gave her a polite, professional nod. "Miss Periwinkle." Then he turned to Deputies Miller and Chin. "What's the situation?" Miller filled him in. Anonymous complaint, obstruction claim, unpermitted commercial work. Then he added that the work was entirely on private land and the only vehicle obstructing traffic had been Brenda's. Brenda practically vibrated with anticipation, waiting for Michael to confirm her righteousness. Instead, Michael turned to her, voice steady, all professionalism. "Miss Periwinkle," he said, "did you state to dispatch that there was a commercial vehicle actively blocking a public roadway?" Brenda puffed up. "Yes, I did. Because there was. This whole setup is a menace." Michael glanced at Gus's truck, well inside my driveway. Then at the open county road, now clear except for sheriff vehicles. "So just to be clear," he continued, "you called in an obstruction of a public road by a tree crew, when in fact their equipment was not on the road at all?" Brenda hesitated. "Well, it could have been seen as an obstruction. And the noise, the disruption." "Miss Periwinkle," Michael cut in gently but firmly, "the allegation you made triggered a response from county resources. That response requires justification. False or exaggerated claims are a serious matter." She opened her mouth, closed it again. The realization was finally settling in. This wasn't going how she'd imagined. Not only had she failed to assert control, she was now the one being scrutinized. Michael gave her one last measured look, then turned to me. "Mom, I mean Mrs. Gable, you're good here. No violations. You're well within your rights." He gave me the barest flicker of a smile. One only I would catch. Brenda stood frozen, caught between disbelief and outrage. The HOA queen had summoned the law, and found herself standing trial. Instead she conceded, though now far less confidently. Deputy Chin lifted his notepad. "Miss Periwinkle, when we arrived, your vehicle was the one obstructing the road. The arborist's truck was and remains fully within Mrs. Gable's property line. We've spoken with the crew. This kind of tree trimming on private land doesn't require a county permit unless it affects public right-of-way, which this clearly does not." Brenda's cheeks flushed a mottled red. "But the noise, the disruption. Prestigious Pines is right over there," she insisted, flinging an arm toward her kingdom, over 2 miles away across a dense tree line. Michael's expression didn't flinch. "Miss Periwinkle, you are aware that knowingly filing a false report with law enforcement is a criminal offense, yes?" The color drained from her face like spilled paint. Her mouth opened, then shut again. She looked like a freshly caught fish flopping on dry land. I was concerned," she stammered. "I'm a pillar of the community. Concern doesn't give you the right to fabricate details to emergency services," Michael replied, his voice calm but edged with unmistakable steel. "You misled dispatch, wasted county resources, and disrupted the work of private citizens, none of whom were breaking the law." He gestured to Gus. "This gentleman lost time and income. These deputies were pulled from their patrol. All because of a report that was, at best, a gross exaggeration and at worst, a deliberate lie." Deputy Miller stepped forward. "Miss Periwinkle, based on what we've witnessed and the statements gathered, it appears you knowingly filed a false complaint. Your vehicle was the only obstruction, and there is no evidence of any unpermitted activity. This is a misuse of public services." Brenda's eyes darted between the 3 officers, Michael, Miller, and Chin, her expression wide-eyed, stunned. This wasn't vindication. This was a reckoning. "This is outrageous," she sputtered. "I'm the president of—" "Ma'am," Deputy Miller cut in, his patience gone, "your title has no bearing on your behavior. You made a false report. That's a criminal act." He turned to Michael. "Your take." Michael nodded slowly. "Her call included material falsehoods presented as fact. That's what triggered this response. Given Mrs. Gable's previous documentation of harassment, and Miss Periwinkle's long history of nuisance complaints, today's incident crosses the line into direct and prosecutable action." He stepped toward Brenda. The son I had raised, kind, decent, now stood not just as my defender but as the law itself. "Brenda Periwinkle," he said, his voice clear, official, and resolute, "you are hereby informed that your report contained demonstrably false information. Combined with your repeated misuse of complaint systems, your actions today constitute a criminal false report to law enforcement." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. Brenda stood frozen, her lips parted in disbelief. Then came the final blow. Deputy Miller's voice rang out, "Miss Periwinkle, I am placing you under arrest for making a false report to law enforcement." Time seemed to freeze. Brenda's jaw dropped. Gus let out a low whistle. I just stood quietly watching as disbelief bloomed into outrage. "You can't arrest me. Do you know who I am? I'll sue you. I'll sue this whole county. This is an assault on civic duty." Deputy Miller didn't flinch. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you." As he cuffed her hands behind her back with quiet efficiency, her designer knockoff handbag slipped from her shoulder and landed on the gravel with a muted thud. Michael stepped aside, letting his fellow deputies complete the arrest, but he glanced at me. There was something in his eyes, a quiet relief, a grim satisfaction, and maybe an apology for the trouble I'd endured. Brenda Periwinkle, Empress of easements and ornamental shrubbery, was gently guided into the back of the patrol car, her face contorted with disbelief and sputtering rage. It was a sight I don't think I'll ever forget. As the cruiser pulled away, taking Brenda toward the consequences she had so richly earned, Gus turned to me with a wide grin. "Well, ma'am," he said, scratching his beard, "that's one way to deal with a problem neighbor, or non-neighbor, I guess." He chuckled. "Now, can we get back to trimming that tree? The day ain't getting any younger." I smiled genuinely freely. "Yes, Gus," I said. "Let's." Michael lingered for a few minutes after the others had gone. He looked tired but satisfied. "Well, Mom," he said, "that was something." I nodded. "Thank you, Michael. Not just for today. For doing your job. Professionally." He shrugged. "She crossed a line today. Made a false report. That's not something we can overlook, no matter who it is. What about all my logs? The photos, the letters? Will those help?" He smiled. "They just might. The DA might use them to establish a pattern of harassment. But today's arrest stands on its own. It was solid. Public misrepresentation. False police report. And it happened in front of witnesses." He looked out across the yard, my peaceful little kingdom. "Hopefully this sends a message that her HOA fantasy doesn't extend to County Line Road." He headed off on patrol after that. I watched him go, feeling something deep and quiet settle in my chest. The arborist got back to work. Bartholomew wandered over, laid his head on my knee, and thumped his tail. The sun dipped low, casting the sky in vibrant oranges and purples, colors Brenda surely would have deemed unharmonious. Later that evening, Mr. Henderson called. "Heard your old friend Brenda had herself a bit of legal trouble," he said, barely suppressing laughter. "Guess her little empire didn't stretch as far as she thought." Apparently, the prestigious Pines board had held an emergency meeting, without Brenda's overbearing presence to silence dissent. Whispers of misused funds for her surveillance flyers, accusations of power abuse, and talk of a vote of no confidence filled the room. She resigned the next week. Officially, it was to focus on other community endeavors. Unofficially, she knew the walls were closing in. Her replacement, a quiet accountant named Susan, quickly began undoing Brenda's legacy. The color palette expanded. Children were, gasp, seen playing outside. Someone even installed a discreet pink flamingo. No citations were issued. As for me, life in my little bungalow became everything I'd hoped for: quiet, private, and gloriously unregulated. I planted more tomatoes. Put up a bird feeder that attracted all sorts of undesirable birds. Let the meadow grow free and wild. Brenda's pearlescent white Escalade never again rolled down my road. Sometimes while I'm in the garden I think about her. And I don't feel anger anymore, just a bemused sort of pity. Because in the end she destroyed herself. All I had to do was hold my ground. Michael never brought it up again. But when he came over for dinner, there was always a quiet understanding between us. A shared victory in an unspoken war. And I always made his favorite pie, with ingredients grown in my beautifully unregulated yard. So that's the story of how HOA Karen, President Brenda Periwinkle, tried to wield power she didn't have, and ended up in the back of a squad car because of it. All thanks to her own arrogance, and a son who happened to wear a badge. You can't always choose your neighbors, but you can choose to stand your ground. And sometimes that's more than enough.